A millionaire is left in shock when a little girl pulls him away from his wedding. But 5 seconds later, the tug at the altar. The priest hadn't even finished pronouncing the word husband and wife when the thunderous crash paralyzed the 500 guests. It wasn't a murmur or a discreet interruption. It was the brutal, dry, and deafening impact of the cathedral's heavy oak doors slamming against the centuries-old stone walls. The echo bounced off the dome, cutting the breath of Toronto's elite. Sebastian Thorne, the man who didn't flinch at multi-billion-dollar corporate mergers, turned his head with the same slow, deliberate motion as everyone else present. What he saw at the church's threshold made no sense. It didn't fit into his world of calculated perfection, bespoke suits, and strategic alliances. It was a little girl, barely 6 years old. She stood beneath the imposing arch of the entrance, trembling, breathing with a wild agitation that swelled her chest. Her hair, a sea of tight, dark curls, was tangled with dried leaves and dust. But what made the guests stifle gasps of fright was her dress. What might once have been a light cotton garment was now a crust of dark, thick, wet mud, dripping directly onto the church's pristine checkered marble floor. "What is this?" whispered Isabella Thorne behind Sebastian's back. Her voice, always sweet, always controlled, now held a metallic edge, a vibration of contained rage. Sebastian had never heard from her. But Sebastian didn't answer her. He couldn't. He was rooted to the spot, mesmerized by the figure who had just burst into his wedding. The girl didn't remain static. Her wide-open eyes scanned the crowd. Ignoring the horrified faces of politicians and entrepreneurs in the pews, she was looking for someone, and then her gaze collided with Sebastian's at the altar. The physical impact of that gaze struck the millionaire with the force of a head-on collision. He felt the air leave his lungs. It wasn't possible. The color of those eyes, the way they looked at him with a mixture of absolute terror and desperate hope, were a ghost he himself had buried in a sealed coffin 7 years ago. Without a second's hesitation, the girl began to run. Her bare, mud-covered feet pounded the black and white floor with a frantic cadence. Squish, 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 leaving a trail of dirt, desecrating the invisible carpet of perfection Isabella had orchestrated. She rushed past the carved wooden pews, adorned with delicate clouds of white flowers, shattering the sepulchral silence of the sanctuary with the sound of her ragged breath. Sebastian's private security, men trained to neutralize armed threats, remained frozen by the absurdity of the scene. Who stops a 6-year-old girl covered in mud, in the middle of a religious ceremony? "Stop her!" hissed Isabella, finally losing her composure. Her hand, encased in white lace, clenched Sebastian's arm like a claw. But it was too late. The girl reached the foot of the altar, ignoring the steps. She lunged directly towards Sebastian, dodging the scandalized priest who stepped back. She crashed into the groom's legs with the force of a frightened animal. Her hands, small and stained with black, greasy earth, clung desperately to the impeccable fabric of Sebastian's navy blue suit. The mud instantly stained the Italian wool, ruining the designer outfit in a fraction of a second. Sebastian looked down, paralyzed. He felt the coldness of the girl's hands through the fabric of his trousers. He felt the dampness of the mud. He felt the entire world stop spinning. The girl looked up at him. She was crying, but she made no sound. Tears carved clean furrows down her dirty cheeks. Her green eyes, those eyes that haunted his worst nightmares, pierced him through and through. Then she tugged at him. It wasn't a gentle brush. It was a violent, demanding pull, laden with life-or-death urgency. The girl stood on tiptoes, brought her face close to the millionaire's chest, and with a hoarse, broken voice that only he could hear above the incipient chaos, whispered 3 phrases that shattered Sebastian Thorne's universe. The fire lied. "Constance is alive. You have to run." 5 seconds later, time stopped. Literally, Sebastian's brain collapsed under the weight of the impossibility, fragmenting reality into agonizing slow motion. It was exactly 5 seconds, 5 heartbeats that rewrote his existence. Second one, denial. The fire lied. The phrase echoed in his skull like an alarm bell. His mind rejected the information. Constance had died. He saw the charred car at the bottom of the ravine on the highway to Calgary. He saw the ashes. He signed the death certificate. This girl couldn't be saying that. It was a cruel joke, a psychological attack from some business rival. It had to be. Second two, the evidence. Sebastian looked down, trying to push the girl away to demand answers, but as he looked closely, the denial fractured. The shape of her jaw, the rebellious curl that fell over her left eye. And those eyes, my God, those eyes weren't similar. They were exactly the same, They were Constance's eyes, and the girl was 6 years old. The accident was 7 years ago. The math delivered a devastating blow to his stomach if Constance was pregnant when the car went over. Second 3. The mask breaks. The stupefied silence of the church shattered. Murmurs turned into exclamations of indignation. The priest stammered, but it was the movement beside him that brought Sebastian back to earthly reality. Isabella Fontaine was not acting like a surprised or frightened bride. Her hand, the same one that was to receive the wedding ring, dug into Sebastian's forearm with unnatural strength. Her long, polished nails pierced through the white shirt beneath his jacket, seeking to wound. Sebastian turned his face to her. He expected to see confusion, but he found a predator. Isabella's face was contorted into a grimace of icy, pure, calculating fury. She wasn't looking at Sebastian. She was looking at the girl with a hatred so deep, so lethal, that it made the millionaire's blood run cold. "Kill her," Isabella whispered, her lips barely moving in a hiss that wasn't directed at Sebastian, but at someone else. Second 4. The threat. Sebastian's survival instinct, the same one that had made him the king of industry in the north of the country, activated like a spring. He followed Isabella's line of sight. First row, bride's side. A man Sebastian had assumed was a distant relative of Isabella's. A man in a gray suit with a faint scar on his neck. The man wasn't looking surprised. His face was stone. While the rest of the guests gasped, the man in the gray suit slid his right hand inside his jacket towards his armpit holster. The movement was fast, professional. Blued steel gleamed under the light of the stained glass windows, a weapon with a silencer screwed onto the barrel, and it wasn't aimed at Sebastian. It was raising the barrel directly at the head of the girl who was still clinging to the groom's leg. Isabella Fontaine had ordered an execution in the middle of her own wedding. Second 5. The explosion. Everything clicked into place in a fraction of a second. The speed with which Isabella reacted. The hitman in the first row. The mud on the girl. The phrase, "Constance is alive." Isabella knew. Isabella had always known. His entire life for the past 7 years was an invisible prison, a macabre charade orchestrated by the woman in white beside him. And the only proof of that charade, the only connection to the love of his life, was about to be shot in the head in less than a second. Diplomacy died right there. Sebastian, the businessman, vanished, replaced by something more primitive and violent. With a sudden, savage movement, Sebastian tore his arm from Isabella's grip, pushing her back. The force of the movement ripped her delicate French silk veil with a harsh sound, and the bride stumbled against the priest, losing her balance. At the same time, Sebastian crouched down. He didn't try to reason, he didn't scream for security, he didn't ask questions. His large, strong hands grabbed the girl, enveloping her small, mud-covered shoulders. He felt the child's tremor. "Hold on tight," he shouted, a foot from her face. The millionaire suddenly straightened up, lifting the girl off the ground for an instant to spin on his own axis, placing himself as a human shield between her and the first row. A dull sound, like a spit of compressed air, brushed past Sebastian's ear. The projectile impacted one of the floral arrangements on the altar, exploding the white flowers in a shower of shattered petals. No one heard the shot over the chaos of screams, but Sebastian felt the wind of the bullet. It was real. They were going to be massacred right there. "Run, run, run!" Sebastian roared, gripping Sophie's muddy little hand with an iron grip, and they ran. Not towards the sacristy, not towards the altar. They ran straight down the central aisle, in the opposite direction from the altar, towards the main doors through which the girl had just entered. Panic erupted in St. James Cathedral. The guests finally reacted to the chaos, but they didn't know what they were fleeing from. Women in designer dresses screamed, tripping over their own heels. Businessmen instinctively ducked, not knowing why. The wooden pews creaked under the weight of the crowd trying to move away from the center. Sebastian dragged Sophie, or perhaps she dragged him. The image was a visual delirium. The city's most powerful man. His face contorted with panic, and his suit ruined, running at full speed hand in hand with a barefoot, mud-blackened girl, both dodging the horrified guests. The blur of their race, the warm candlelight crashing against the frantic movement of their bodies. Behind them, at the high altar, Isabella Fontaine had regained her footing. There was no trace of the perfect bride left. Her white dress was trampled, her veil torn. She stood before the marble altar, watching her empire and her deception flee through the main door. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply made a dry gesture with her hand towards the man in the gray suit, and towards 3 other guests, who suddenly stood up in unison in different parts of the church. The hunt had begun, and Sebastian only had a little girl's hand to guide him in the darkness, the hiding place of the guilty. The central aisle of the cathedral had become a tunnel of collective hysteria. The faces of the guests were blurry blurs of panic rushing past as Sebastian Thorne dragged the mud-covered girl. Voices merged into a single deafening shriek. Women in haute couture dresses pushed each other, trampling floral arrangements and spilled pearls. Men who minutes before discussed multi-million-dollar investments now scrambled over mahogany pews like cornered animals, trying to flee an invisible threat. Sebastian didn't look back, but his ears, sharpened by adrenaline, caught the unmistakable sound of danger. Another muffled, dull, brutal thud. A piece of the checkered marble floor exploded into 1,000 shards of white shrapnel, just inches from his left shoe. A silenced projectile. They weren't firing warning shots. They were shooting to kill in the middle of a crowd of 500 people, and the target was the head of the girl clinging to his hand. The immense oak doors of the main entrance seemed miles away. The human bottleneck of desperate guests blocked the exit. Going out that way was tactical suicide. They would be a static target trapped in the mob. This way, Sebastian roared, giving Sophie's arm a sharp tug. The millionaire spun violently to the left, abandoning the central aisle and plunging into the dark side nave. He stumbled over a marble statue, feeling his jacket tear, but he didn't stop. His mind worked at 1,000 miles an hour, processing architectural plans instead of contracts. He knew the cathedral. He had paid for the complete restoration of the roof 2 years ago, at Isabella's insistence. Oh, Isabella! 10 meters away, hidden in the gloom among the carved wooden confessionals, was the heavy double door leading to the sacristy and the clergy's internal passages. "Run! Don't look back! Don't stop!" he ordered the girl, whose breathing was already an agonizing wheeze. Sophie wasn't crying, but her legs trembled from the superhuman effort. They left trails of black mud, mixed with blood from her bare feet on the cold stone. A third shot impacted the wood of a confessional just as they crossed in front of it, splintering the ancient varnish. Sebastian pushed the girl with his shoulder, both of them throwing themselves against the sacristy door. The iron hardware groaned with a metallic squeal. They tumbled inside, rolling across the terracotta floor. The change was drastic. From blinding light, deafening noise, and the crowd, they entered dense darkness, claustrophobic silence, and a strong smell of stale incense, melted wax, and old wood. Sebastian didn't lose half a second. He sprang to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his knees, and slammed the heavy oak door shut. He slid the enormous wrought iron bolt into place just as a body crashed furiously against the other side of the wood. The impact vibrated the walls. Someone tried to turn the handle frantically, but the ancient metal resisted. They were locked in, safe for a few minutes, but trapped. The millionaire leaned against the door, panting, feeling his heart would burst through his sternum. Cold sweat drenched his ruined shirt. He ran a trembling hand through his hair, trying to ignite his brain, trying to process the absolute madness that had just detonated his life. In the gloom, barely illuminated by filtered light from a tall stained glass window, he spotted the girl. Sophie was huddled under an immense oak table where the priests prepared the chalices. She trembled like a leaf in a storm, hugging her knees. The mud that covered her was drying, forming a cracked shell on her skin. Sebastian took a step towards her. His shoes crunched on the ancient floor. "Who?" His voice failed him. It sounded hoarse, broken. "Who sent you? Who are you?" The girl looked up. In the darkness, her green eyes shone with a supernatural intensity. She didn't answer with words. Her small, dirty hands desperately rummaged in the inside pocket of her muddy dress. She struggled to pull out something that was stuck in the damp fabric. Finally, she succeeded. She stretched her trembling arm towards Sebastian, offering him an object that fit in the palm of his hand. Sebastian knelt slowly, feeling the air in the sacristy become unbreathable. He extended his hand. The girl dropped the object onto the millionaire's palm. It was heavy, metallic. Sebastian reached into his left trouser pocket and pulled out his mobile phone. He turned on the flashlight with clumsy fingers. The beam of white light cut through the darkness and hit the object in his hand directly. Sebastian Thorne's entire world stopped for a second time in less than 10 minutes. His lungs seized. A dull hum filled his ears, drowning out the blows that were starting to echo again against the locked door. In his hand lay a thick silver chain, blackened and partially melted. Hanging from it was an engagement ring. The main diamond had shattered from extreme heat, leaving only an empty, deformed setting. But the inside of the platinum band, protected by the curve of the metal, was still intact. Sebastian didn't need to read the inscription, but the light illuminated the laser-engraved letters. C plus S. It was Constance's ring, the ring he himself had thrown into the mahogany urn before it was sealed. The ring that was supposed to be resting in the Thorne family mausoleum under 3 meters of marble. Oxygen vanished from the room. Sebastian collapsed backward, falling to sit on the terracotta floor. The phone slipped from his hand, illuminating the vaulted ceiling and casting monstrous shadows on the walls. "No, it can't be," he whispered, his voice choked by a knot of pure terror and agony. "I closed the urn. I saw her remains. I buried her." The fire lied. The girl repeated from under the table with a thread of a voice that cut like a scalpel. "She said to give you this. She said only you knew about the ashes." Sebastian looked up. The sidelight from the phone illuminated half of the girl's muddy face. The truth crushed him with the force of a landslide. Constance was not in that car. Constance did not die charred on the highway to Calgary that morning. And if Constance wasn't in that car, whose remains had he mourned for 7 years? And worse still, who was this girl fleeing from? The truth in the mud. Sebastian crawled across the floor, closing the distance to the girl. He grabbed her shoulders, not violently, but with a feverish intensity. His large hands stained the cuffs of his shirt with mud. He no longer cared about the suit. He no longer cared about the wedding. He no longer cared about the empire of steel and glass he had built in Toronto. There was only the deformed ring in his pocket and the green eyes that stared at him, terrified. "Tell me," Sebastian demanded, staring at her inches from her face. "Tell me right now, where is she? Where is my wife? What's your name?" The girl swallowed with difficulty. Her chest rose and fell rapidly. "My name is Sophie," she stammered, tears opening new furrows in the grime on her cheeks. She's in the place with the cold walls, the old sanatorium, where it smells of bad medicine." Sebastian's brain processed the information like an overloaded computer. The old sanatorium. The Fontaine family, Isabella's family, had made their original fortune in the healthcare sector. They owned dozens of properties, but there was an abandoned psychiatric clinic on the outskirts of the city, on the national highway, that Isabella always refused to sell. She claimed it was a family historical patrimony. "They kept you locked up there?" Sebastian asked, feeling a dark, thick, homicidal rage begin to boil in his blood. Sophie nodded, frantically. "We were always there, in the basement, no windows, only the light from the ceiling. Mom always cried when she heard the lady in white's footsteps." The lady in white, Isabella. Sebastian closed his eyes tightly, feeling nauseous. The world's most macabre puzzle was assembling itself in his mind, piece by piece. Isabella was Constance's best friend. It was Isabella who called him that night, crying, saying Constance's car had gone off the road. It was Isabella who handled the paperwork because he was sedated in a hospital, destroyed by grief. It was Isabella who identified the burned bracelet on the unrecognizable body. It was Isabella who comforted him for years, who became his partner, his confidante, his life support, and finally his fiancé. Isabella didn't save her. Isabella kidnapped her, faked her death, stole her life, locked her in a concrete dungeon for 7 years, and built a throne on the living corpse of her best friend. "How did you get out?" Sebastian asked, his voice trembling with contained fury. He opened his eyes, and now there was no panic in them. There was ice, pure and absolute ice. Today there was a lot of noise," Sophie explained, speaking very fast, tripping over her words. "Almost all the guards left to come to the big party. Mom broke a bathroom pipe a long time ago. She was digging the earth. Today, she made a big hole. She pushed me through the dirty water pipe. She couldn't fit. She was very thin, but she couldn't fit. She told me, 'Follow the dirty water to the river. Then run along the highway until you see the church with the tall spires. Look for the man in the blue suit. Give him the fire ring. He will save you.'" Sophie clung to Sebastian's ruined shirt, digging her little fingers into the fabric. "She said they would kill me if they saw me," the girl sobbed, losing for an instant the courage that had kept her standing. "I ran a lot. I hid in the back of a vegetable truck. Then I ran more. When I came in here, the lady in white saw me. Her eyes were scary." Sebastian hugged the girl, pressing her against his chest with unwavering protective force, uncaring of the dirt, the mud, or the smell of dampness and sewage emanating from her. She was Constance's daughter. By her age, by the relentless math of time, she was his daughter. The daughter Isabella had stolen from him and kept rotting in an underground dungeon to secure her empire. A brutal crash brought him back to reality. Bam! The solid wooden sacristy door bulged inward. Dust fell from the stone frame. Someone was using something very heavy, perhaps a solid wood kneeling bench or a statue as a battering ram against the door. The iron bolt groaned, complaining under the brutal force. Splinters began to fly. "Open the door, you bastards!" A hoarse voice roared from the other side. It wasn't the church security. It was one of the hitmen in a gray suit. Bam! Another shake. The wood cracked in the center with an ominous snap. It wouldn't withstand 3 more blows. Sebastian sprang to his feet, lifting Sophie into his arms as if she weighed nothing. The frightened, confused businessman had died. The man who had just been born in that dark room was a monster willing to unleash hell on earth to reclaim what was his. He reached into his pocket, squeezing the deformed ring until the metal dug into his skin. With his other hand, he raised his phone, illuminating the back wall of the sacristy. He searched among the enormous mahogany cabinets where the liturgical vestments were kept. He knew what he was looking for. There had to be an exit. The architecture of colonial cathedrals always had clerical escape routes during times of unrest. His eyes caught a strange relief behind an immense tapestry embroidered with gold threads depicting the Virgin Mary. Crack. The main sacristy door gave way halfway. A black leather boot kicked the splintered gap, trying to reach the latch from outside. Through the hole, Sebastian saw the cold glint of the silenced pistol peeking through. "Time's up, Thorne," the man growled from the other side, sticking the barrel of the weapon through the broken wood. "The boss wants the brat's head. If you hand her over, maybe she'll let you live to sign the will." Sebastian didn't answer. He turned off his phone's flashlight, plunging the room into absolute darkness. He ran towards the golden tapestry, pulling Sophie towards the cold stone wall. His hand frantically felt the edges of the wall behind the heavy fabric, searching for the hidden mechanism, while the hitman finished kicking in the main door's lock. The hunt had just escalated, and the millionaire was no longer the prey, he was vengeance incarnate. The broken mask, the chaos in the main nave of the cathedral, had reached a boiling point. The 500 guests, Toronto's financial and political elite, pushed towards the enormous oak main doors, seeking to flee the blind terror that had been unleashed. However, the forged iron fittings did not give way. The doors were blocked from the inside, and Isabella Fontaine, standing before the white marble altar, no longer looked like an abandoned bride. With a cold, calculated movement, she tore off what remained of her French silk veil and let it fall onto the trampled petals. Her face, which minutes before radiated a rehearsed sweetness, was now a granite mask. Her eyes, dark and empty, scanned the terrified crowd with the contempt of one observing insects trapped in a jar. She raised her right hand. She didn't have to shout. From among the guests, a dozen men in formal suits, but with overly loose cuts, ceased feigning panic. They drew compact submachine guns, short-barreled weapons they had managed to smuggle in, bypassing the external security ring. Within seconds, they took tactical positions at every exit, in the side naves and in front of the altar. "Silence!" Isabella ordered. Her voice was not a shout, but it resonated through the altar microphones, cutting through the collective hysteria like an ice blade. "If anyone takes out a phone, I'll break their hands. If anyone screams, I'll blow their head off. Everyone sit down." A sepulchral silence, dense and charged with terror, fell over the cathedral. The guests slowly obeyed, sitting in the mahogany pews, trembling under the barrels of the weapons. Isabella descended the altar steps. Her white heels echoed on the checkered floor. She approached a burly man with an earpiece, the tactical leader of her mercenaries. "Signal blocker activated, ma'am," the man reported, his gaze fixed on the ground. "No one can make an outgoing call. The police think it's a private, closed-door wedding. We have 15 minutes before Thorne's external security protocol notices the anomaly." "I don't need 15 minutes, Raj," Isabella said, looking towards the dark side nave where Sebastian had fled. "That idiot just found out his dead wife breathes, but he has no way out. I want the girl. Bring me her head, or I swear to God yours will adorn the hood of my car. Understood?" While Isabella sentenced her fiancé to death, in the sacristy, hell was a second away from breaking loose. The thick wooden door finally gave way with an agonizing creak. The hinges burst, and the splintered wood collapsed inward in a cloud of dust and ancient varnish. The hitman in the gray suit burst in with his weapon raised, scanning the darkness with a tactical flashlight attached to the barrel. But Sebastian was not there. A fraction of a second before the door collapsed, Sebastian's bleeding fingers had found the exact groove behind the immense tapestry of the Virgin. He pressed the carved stone with the full weight of his body. The wall groaned, a dull sound of colonial pulleys and counterweights that hadn't moved in decades, and a section of the stone wall slid inward, revealing an abyss of absolute blackness. Sebastian pushed Sophie into the icy gap and plunged in after her, dragging the tapestry to conceal the opening. Just as the stone wall began to slowly close by inertia, the hitman's light beam swept the room and fixed on the moving wall. "They're here!" the killer roared. The man fired. The silencer spat fire 3 times. The bullets impacted the stone milliseconds after the secret door clicked into its frame with a dull thud, sealing Sebastian and the girl in the cathedral's bowels. Sebastian felt stone dust sting his face in the darkness. They had escaped by a hair's breadth. They were safe from bullets, but submerged in suffocating blackness. The air down here didn't smell of incense. It smelled of damp earth, ancient confinement, and death. These were the old catacombs, the tunnels that connected the cathedral to the back streets of downtown Toronto. Sophie clung to Sebastian's leg, sobbing silently. The millionaire knelt, panting, and hugged her in the darkness. "It's over, little one, it's over," he whispered in her ear, though he knew it was a lie. It was just beginning. He turned his phone's flashlight to the lowest possible setting. The pale cone of light revealed a narrow corridor of exposed bricks and low-vaulted ceilings. The floor was packed earth, slippery with centuries of dampness. There was no time to rest. Isabella would find a way to open that wall. "We have to keep moving," Sebastian said, standing up and taking the girl's hand. "I'm going to get you out of here. I swear it on my life, and then I'm going to go for your mother." They stumbled through the descending tunnel. The cold of the underground bit Sebastian's skin through his torn shirt, but the fury burning in his chest kept him warm. Isabella, the woman who had slept in his bed, who had pretended to cry with him on the anniversary of Constance's death. Bile rose in his throat. He was going to destroy her. He was going to make her beg for mercy amidst the ruins of her empire. But first, he needed an army, and he knew exactly who to call. The intimate enemy. Sebastian momentarily let go of Sophie's hand and touched his index finger to his smartwatch. The crystal was cracked from the fall in the sacristy, but the screen still glowed with a bluish light. Cell signal was null at that depth, but the watch was connected to an encrypted military satellite, an extreme security luxury that cost him millions a year. He tapped the screen 3 times, activating the Thorn Corporation's emergency protocol, Red Channel, direct to the earpiece of Roger Dubois, his personal head of security, an ex-Special Forces operative who had been Sebastian's shadow for 5 years, the man who knew all his secrets and swore to give his life for him. The line emitted a dull tone, bouncing off the satellites until it clicked. "Sir," Roger's voice sounded tense, professional, filtered by the underground static. "We have a red code in the main nave. Armed men have blocked the doors. We lost visual contact with you at the altar. What is your status?" Sebastian let out a sigh he didn't know he was holding. Relief flooded him for a second. He wasn't alone. He had the best tactical strategist in the country on his payroll. "Roger, listen to me carefully," Sebastian whispered, still moving through the icy tunnel, illuminating the brick walls with his phone. "It wasn't an external attack. It's Isabella. Isabella orchestrated all of this. Her men have taken over the church. They have orders to kill me and to kill a girl who is with me." There was a 2-second silence on the other end of the line. A silence that seemed eternal to Sebastian. "Understood, sir?" Roger replied with a strangely monotonous tone. "We proceed to neutralize the internal threat. What is your exact location for extraction?" "I'm in the ancient tunnels. I entered through the sacristy, behind the tapestry. I'm heading towards the north crypt, to the sewer exit on Bay Street. Move Alpha Team to that position. Get me out of here, Roger. We have to go to the old Fontaine Sanatorium on the highway." "Constance." Sebastian's voice broke for a microsecond. "Constance is alive, and Isabella has kept her captive all these years." Another silence. This time it was denser. Sebastian stopped walking. Something in his instinct, the same predatory radar that warned him when a partner was about to betray him in a business meeting, lit up like an air raid siren in his brain. Through the tiny speaker of his watch, Sebastian heard a very faint, very characteristic background sound. It was the metallic click-clack of a gold Zippo lighter opening and closing. Click-clack, click-clack. A nervous tick Isabella Fontaine always made when she was anxious or about to make a lethal decision. Sebastian stopped breathing. The echo of the lighter bounced in the audio. Roger was not on the outer perimeter coordinating the police. Roger was inside the church, next to Isabella. "Copied, boss," Roger said, and his voice no longer sounded professional. It had a dark, almost regretful undertone. "Alpha Team moving towards the North Crypt. Stay there. I repeat, stay in your current position. We're coming for you." Sebastian closed his eyes. The betrayal was a dagger twisting in his gut. Roger, the man who had installed security cameras in his house. The man who managed his vehicle routes. Roger worked for her. Perhaps he always did. And not only had she infiltrated his bed, she had bought the person who was supposed to protect his back. The millionaire did not say a single word. With a quick, violent movement, he tore the smartwatch from his wrist. The titanium strap ripped his skin. He threw the device onto the muddy ground and raised his Italian shoe, crushing the satellite screen with his heel again and again until the crystal cracked. The circuits exploded, and the blue light died forever. He was left without a shield, without an army, without a tracker. He was a ghost underground. "Are the good guys coming?" Sophie asked in a whisper, looking at the remains of the shattered watch in the mud. Sebastian knelt in front of her, turning off the phone's flashlight. Darkness enveloped them like a shroud. Now he could only see the whites of the girl's terrified eyes. "No, little one. There are no good guys here, except you," Sebastian said, his voice distilling a pure, calculating hatred. "We've just been sold out. They're hunting us from both sides." In the distance, echoing against the curved walls of the tunnel behind them, a sound froze Sebastian's blood, the unmistakable sound of stone scraping against stone. Someone had discovered the sacristy mechanism. A powerful, blinding tactical light beam swept the darkness of the tunnel about 100 meters behind them. Accompanied by the light came the echo of rapid footsteps, military boots pounding the earthen floor. These weren't Isabella's gray-suited thugs. That rhythmic, precise, and lethal sound was Roger's tactical squad. His own men were coming to execute him. "The north exit is compromised," Sebastian whispered to the girl, picking her up again to prevent the sound of her bare feet from betraying them. "We have to go deeper." Sebastian turned to the right, leaving the main tunnel, and entering an even narrower and darker fork that stank of stagnant water. Toronto's underground labyrinth was their only chance. The millionaire, stripped of everything, with his ruined suit and his heart pounding 1,000 beats a minute, plunged into the darkness, ready to become a beast to survive the night. The hunt had just reached his heels. Blind escape. The sound of tactical boots pounding the damp earth was not a distant echo. It was the beat of death approaching from behind. Sebastian Thorne could perfectly distinguish the formation of his hunters. As the man who funded that squad, he knew their tactics. They advanced in a wedge formation, sweeping every inch of the tunnel with high-penetration halogen flashlights, assault rifles pressed to their shoulders. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to clean up Isabella's mess. Sebastian pressed Sophie against his chest, feeling the girl's heart beat with the violence of a trapped bird. The stagnant water in the underground conduit reached their ankles. It smelled of sulfur, ancient moss, and rot. The air was so thick that each breath required conscious effort. But the millionaire did not slow down. He advanced blindly, his free hand brushing against the slippery stone wall to avoid losing balance in the absolute darkness. "Boss." Roger Dubois' voice traveled through the darkness, distorted by the tunnel's curvature, but charged with a chilling calm. "We know you took the detour towards the old aqueduct. There's no way out that way. The grating on Bay Street was sealed with concrete 3 years ago. You yourself approved the budget. Hand over the girl. I give you my word that her death will be quick and painless. Isabella only wants the bastard." The word bastard bounced off the stone walls and drove into Sebastian's brain like a red-hot nail. The fury, a volcanic, primitive rage he had never experienced in any boardroom, injected him with a lethal dose of adrenaline. He didn't respond. Speaking would give them an acoustic target. Sebastian knew Roger was right about the concrete. The contractor had sealed the main exit to prevent flooding. But what Roger, the military strategist, didn't know was that Sebastian, the obsessive architect who reviewed every last plan of his donations, remembered an anomaly in the foundations. Halfway along the aqueduct was a Victorian maintenance vent, a wrought iron hatch that connected directly to the back alley of an old printing press in the historic district. "Hold on to my neck, Sophie, tight. Don't let go for anything," Sebastian whispered into the girl's ear, barely an inaudible thread of a voice a meter away. The girl obeyed, wrapping her thin, dry, mud-covered arms around Sebastian's neck. The millionaire used both hands to feel the vaulted ceiling. The water now reached their knees. Rats squealed around them, fleeing the tactical lights that were beginning to paint the curved wall white behind them. They were less than 50 meters away. Sebastian's fingers, cut and bleeding from the fall in the sacristy, found the rusted metal on the ceiling. "The hatch. Light ahead. Visual contact possible," shouted one of the mercenaries. A beam of light crossed the murky water, illuminating Sebastian's back for a fraction of a second. Fire at will, Roger roared. The entire tunnel thundered. The deafening roar of silenced automatic rifles spitting bursts of lead filled the confined space. Bullets impacted the water and stone inches from Sebastian's legs, raising geysers of rotten mud and splintering the centuries-old bricks. A fragment of stone bounced and cut the millionaire's cheek, but he didn't stop. With a guttural roar that tore his throat, Sebastian pushed the iron hatch upwards with both hands, using the desperate strength of a cornered animal. The 100-year-old rust creaked. The hinges groaned. The 50 kilograms iron plate barely lifted a few centimeters, letting in a thin stream of orange light from the streetlights above. Bam! Another burst shattered the wall right next to his head. Brick dust temporarily blinded him. "Climb!" he ordered Sophie, pushing the girl through the narrow gap he had managed to open. Sophie, agile and small, slipped through the opening like a frightened cat, scraping her arms against the rusty metal. As soon as she was out, Sebastian shoved his shoulders into the gap. The mercenary's tactical light illuminated him fully. "There he is! Don't let him out!" Sebastian propelled himself upwards with the strength of his forearms, just as a bullet grazed his calf, tearing his Italian suit trousers and burning his skin. He managed to emerge into the cobblestone alley, falling face down into accumulated puddles. Without losing a millisecond, he rolled onto his back and kicked the heavy iron hatch with both feet. The plate fell with a massive metallic clang, sealing the hole just as a gloved tactical hand tried to grasp the edge. A muffled cry of pain was heard from below, and the sound of shots bouncing uselessly against the wrought iron. Sebastian didn't stay to check if the cover would hold. He grabbed Sophie's hand and melted into the shadows of the alley, leaving the underground behind and plunging into the urban labyrinth of the surface. A change of skin. The night air of Toronto was dense, heavy with that hot humidity that portends a storm. The flickering neon lights of a closed bar dimly illuminated the narrow alley of the old district. Sebastian leaned against a peeling adobe wall, breathing with his mouth open, trying to force oxygen into his burning lungs. He was shattered. The man on the Forbes magazine cover, the impeccable magnate of telecommunications and real estate, had disappeared. His white shirt was a rag soaked with sewer water, sweat, dried blood, and black mud. The navy blue jacket was torn from shoulder to hip, and his face was crossed by a bleeding cut. At his feet, Sophie shivered with cold, clutching Constance's ring in her fist with a death grip. The wail of sirens cut through the night. From his position at the end of the alley, Sebastian could see Queen Street. It was plagued with red and blue lights. Armored state police vehicles surrounded the cathedral perimeter 3 blocks away. But Sebastian knew the truth. The police wouldn't save them. Roger had contacts in all corporations. The authorities would believe the version of a failed terrorist attack and establish a cordon to protect Isabella. Meanwhile, Dubois' death squads would patrol the streets looking for him. "We have to go to the place with the cold walls," Sophie whispered, tugging weakly at Sebastian's torn sleeve. "Mom is waiting for me. She promised me she would hold on, but she coughs a lot of blood." Sebastian's stomach clenched violently. Coughs blood. Constance. His Constance. The brilliant woman with the booming laugh and green eyes who had taught him to love, rotting in the basement of the old Fontaine Psychiatric Sanatorium on the National Highway. The urgency hit him with the force of a sledgehammer. He peered around the corner of the alley towards King Street. 50 meters away, he recognized the silhouette of one of his own escort vehicles, a black, level 5 armored Suburban. The engine was running. A suited man with a clear earpiece smoked, leaning against the hood, scanning the few pedestrians who dared to walk there at that hour. It was a checkpoint. They were cornering him. Sebastian reached into his pocket. He still had the keys to his luxury sedan, parked at the church's valet, his black, limitless credit cards, and his alligator skin wallet. He pulled everything out. The cards, the checkbook, his ID. He looked at the plastic and metal that dictated his power in the world. If he used a card, he would be tracked in 3 seconds. If he got into one of his cars, Roger would remotely shut off the engine via satellite and lock the doors. His fortune, at this precise moment, was worth absolutely nothing. It was a death trap. With a dry movement, he threw the credit cards and car keys into a nearby sewer. He heard the splash of plastic falling into the dirty water. He removed his platinum luxury watch from his left wrist and put it in his pocket. That was cash, untraceable. "This way. Stick to the wall, zero noise," he ordered, taking Sophie into his arms to move faster through the shadows. They moved stealthily through the backyards of old colonial houses, jumping over stone fences, dodging broken bottles, and stray dogs that growled at them as they passed. Sebastian calculated every step with machine-like precision. He needed transportation, something old, analog, without GPS, without onboard computers, something that the government's security cameras, which Roger had access to, would completely ignore. Around a corner, near the market district, he found his ticket out. In the loading area of a dark fruit warehouse was a 90s model rusty Ford pickup truck. The original white paint was eaten away by rust, and the wooden flatbed was half loaded with empty tomato crates. The driver, a young man in a dirty apron, was arguing heatedly on a flip phone on the sidewalk opposite, with his back to the vehicle. The truck's engine was running. It coughed black smoke from the loose exhaust pipe, sounding like a coffee maker about to explode. Sebastian felt not a drop of remorse. He put Sophie down, signaled her to crouch, and ran silently, hunched over, using the engine noise to mask his footsteps. He reached the passenger door, opened it silently, and lifted the girl into the broken vinyl seat that reeked of stale tobacco and onions. Then he crept around the truck, staying out of the driver's line of sight. He opened the driver's door and slid behind the grease-sticky steering wheel. He put the gear lever into drive. The young man in the apron turned his head just as Sebastian floored the accelerator. The old truck roared, spinning its worn tires on the wet pavement. The young man shouted something unintelligible and ran towards them, but Sebastian swerved wildly, knocking over 2 empty wooden crates, and merged at full speed onto the dark avenue, disappearing into the midnight traffic of the industrial city. The hot wind slapped Sebastian's face through the missing window. The millionaire looked in the rear-view mirror. No sirens followed him. The perfect camouflage. A rusty old truck disappearing into the vastness of the industrial city. Beside him, Sophie was huddled on the truck's floor, hugging her knees so no one could see her from outside. The orange streetlights flickered over her muddy face. Sebastian looked at her. The physical resemblance was so painful it stole his breath. Constance's nose, the stubborn way she pressed her lips together. Sophie looked up and met the eyes of the man driving like a maniac. "You're my dad, aren't you?" the girl asked. Her voice was barely a whisper over the roaring old engine, but it crossed the cab with the force of a point-blank shot. "Mom told me not to be scared of you. She said you had the saddest eyes in the world, but you would defend me from monsters." Sebastian felt his throat close. The tears he hadn't shed in 7 years, that he had forbidden himself since the empty funeral, burned the edges of his eyes. He gripped the cracked plastic steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The pain of the past 7 years condensed into a single instant of crushing clarity. Isabella had robbed him of seeing his daughter's first steps. She had robbed him of hearing her first word. She had condemned him to a hell of solitude while the love of his life breathed beneath the earth. Sebastian floored the accelerator, ignoring the red light crossing Young Street. "Yes, little one. I'm your dad," Sebastian replied, and his voice did not tremble. It was loaded with a macabre, cold, and absolute promise. "And the monsters don't know what's coming for them. Hold on tight. We're going to get your mother out of that hell." The glass prison. The old Ford's engine spit one last puff of black smoke before Sebastian turned off the headlights. The darkness of the national highway swallowed them whole. To their right, hidden behind a curtain of black pines and wild brush, rose the monstrous silhouette of the old Fontaine family psychiatric sanatorium. There were no signs, no lights in the windows of the imposing, brutalist concrete building, designed in the 70s and officially abandoned a decade ago. To the world, it was a dead block of cement. To Sebastian, it was the tomb where his life had been buried alive. The millionaire stopped the rusty truck behind an earthen mound 100 meters from the main entrance. The silence of the forest on the outskirts of Toronto was deafening, interrupted only by the distant chirping of crickets and the girl's agitated breathing beside him. "Listen closely, Sophie," Sebastian ordered, turning to her with electric intensity. "You're going to stay here. You're going to hide under the seat, close to the metal floor. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, you are not going to come out, do you understand? If you see lights, close your eyes, don't make a sound. I'm going to get your mother, and I'm coming back for you. I swear it on my soul." The girl nodded, her eyes immense and bright in the darkness. Her small, dirty hands released the torn fabric of Sebastian's jacket. "Don't let the lady in white hurt her," Sophie whispered, her voice broken. Sebastian didn't respond with words. He clenched his jaw until his teeth ached. He grabbed a heavy, rusty iron lug wrench he had found on the truck floor and opened the door silently. The icy pre-dawn air hit his wounded face. He slipped among the trees, moving like a vengeful ghost. The designer suit, now turned to rags, blended perfectly with the shadows. As he approached the perimeter wall topped with barbed wire, Sebastian's hunter instinct sharpened. Isabella would not have left this place unprotected, not even on her wedding day. He peered through a gap in the brick fence. There was the first line of defense, a security booth camouflaged under ivy. Two men smoked cheap cigarettes, illuminating their bored faces with intermittent embers. They wore dark tactical vests over civilian clothes and submachine guns slung around their necks. They were Roger's mercenaries, the stragglers who had stayed guarding the cage while the others attended the big party. Sebastian squeezed the rusty iron in his right hand. The Forbes list businessman had died at the altar. The man now breathing in the forest was a primitive beast, ready to tear apart anyone who stood between him and Constance. He waited for one of the men to enter the booth to urinate. The other remained outside, kicking stones in the gravel, his back to the forest. It was a matter of 3 seconds. Sebastian leaped over the low, fallen wall with a feline agility born of pure adrenaline. He made no sound as he landed. He launched himself onto the mercenary's back before the man could take another puff of his cigarette. Sebastian's left arm clamped around the guard's neck, blocking his trachea in a perfect, brutal chokehold. At the same time, the iron lug wrench hit the man's temple with a dull, horrifying crunch. The guard collapsed like a lead sack without emitting a single sound. The second mercenary emerged from the booth, zipping up his trousers. "Hey buddy, where did you put the—" The words died in his throat. Sebastian was already in front of him. The millionaire charged with the force of a freight train, crushing the man against the bulletproof glass of the booth. Sebastian's knee shot up like a piston, shattering the mercenary's sternum. Before the man could raise his submachine gun, Sebastian snatched the weapon with a savage tug and delivered a direct butt stroke to his jaw. The crunch of bones filled the night. The guard fell unconscious in his own blood. Sebastian didn't stop to look at the bodies. He stripped them of a magnetic access card and a tactical flashlight. He checked the submachine gun's magazine 30 hollow-point rounds and took off the safety. The coldness of the steel in his hands was comforting. It was the weight of justice. He crossed the central courtyard, zigzagging, dodging the rusted security cameras that, he knew well, were still operational. He reached the immense tempered glass doors of the main building. They were electronically locked. He slid the blood-stained card through the reader. A green beep confirmed access. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss. The sanatorium's interior was an architectural nightmare. The stench of stale industrial disinfectant, mixed with dampness and asbestos dust, hit him like a slap. The corridors were endless tunnels of chipped white tiles. Rusted wheelchairs lay overturned in the corners like metal skeletons. Sophie's voice echoed in his mind. In the basement, no windows, only the light from the ceiling. Sebastian ignored the closed-off elevators. He found the service stairwell door, kicked it open, and began the descent into the bowels of madness. Each step echoed in the concrete stairwell. 1 floor down, 2 floors, 3. The air became heavier, colder, more unbreathable. The temperature had dropped 10 degrees. He reached level -3, the deep basement, the psychiatric isolation area from the 1950s. The corridor here didn't have white tiles. It was blocks of gray concrete dimly lit by dying fluorescent bulbs that hummed like swarms of flies. There were a dozen heavy steel doors, without exterior handles, locked with thick electronic bolts. They were maximum security cells designed for violent patients. Sebastian advanced slowly, gripping the submachine gun. The silence down here was supernatural, heavy, suffocating. His steps crunched on a layer of dirty water and earth. His trail stopped dead, and he pointed the flashlight at the ground. There were footprints, small, muddy tracks leading from a busted ventilation grate near the floor towards one of the cells at the back. It was Sophie's escape route. At the end of the corridor, cell number 7 had a red light on above the steel frame. It was locked. Sebastian ran to it, pressing his face against the small, shoebox-sized, bulletproof observation glass embedded in the center of the door. The glass was fogged from within. Constance. His voice came out as a choked scratch, a plea to God, to the universe. Sebastian wiped the fogged glass with the torn sleeve of his shirt and looked inside. The horror of what he saw froze the blood in his veins. The ghost of Toronto. The cell was a bare, concrete shoebox. There was no bed, only a stained mattress thrown on the floor, under the dying light of a single bulb protected by a wire cage. In one corner, the earth was disturbed, concealing the broken pipe through which Sophie had escaped to the surface. And in the center of that grim tomb, chained by her right ankle to a heavy shackle embedded in the wall, was a woman. Sebastian let out an animal groan, recoiling a step, as if he had been shot point-blank in the chest. She was turned away from the door, curled in a fetal position, wearing gray rags that hung from her skeletal body. Her hair, which Sebastian remembered as a thick, black cascade that smelled of vanilla, was now a matted, dull, and thinning gray, falling over her bony shoulders. She was trembling uncontrollably, coughing with a wet, wrenching sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Constance!" Sebastian shouted, pounding the steel door with his bare fists. Ignoring the pain of flesh tearing against metal, the woman stopped coughing, petrified. The sound of her name, spoken by that specific voice, had not resonated in that dungeon for 7,000 days and nights. Slowly, with an agonizing slowness that demonstrated the extreme weakness of her atrophied muscles, she turned her face towards the armored door. Her green eyes were immense, devouring her emaciated face, sunken in dark sockets. She looked through the glass. Her pale, cracked lips trembled, opening and closing without making a sound. The shock on her face was absolute. She raised a trembling hand, covered in scars and dirt, as if to touch the apparition on the other side of the glass, as if she feared her broken mind was playing another cruel hallucination on her. Sebastian couldn't breathe. Hot, thick tears finally overflowed, sliding down his cheeks, mixed with dust and dried blood. "Get away from the glass," Sebastian ordered her. His voice was now the deep roar of a predator. There was no time for tears. The hunt was behind him. Constance understood. Survival instinct shone in those green eyes. She dragged her chained body to the opposite corner, covering her head with her arms. Sebastian raised the submachine gun, aimed directly at the electronic lockbox embedded in the steel frame. He pulled the trigger. The deafening burst shattered the silence of level -3. Sparks, molten plastic, and steel fragments flew down the corridor. The electronic panel exploded, spitting blue sparks. But the master titanium bolt, designed to contain enraged psychiatric patients, remained stuck. Sebastian kicked the steel door with all his might, the sole of his Italian shoe slipping on the metal. He kicked again. Pure rage injected him with inhuman strength. On the fourth impact, the shattered hinges gave way, and the heavy door swung inward with a screech of tearing metal, bouncing against the concrete wall. Sebastian threw the weapon to the ground, lunged into the cell, falling to his knees in front of her. There were no words of love, no romantic movie declarations. Reality was crude, reeking of sickness, earth, and confinement. Sebastian wrapped his strong arms around the fragile, malnourished body of the woman he loved. He felt every bone of her ribs beneath the ragged cloth. Constance clung to his torn shirt with fingers that seemed like desperate claws, burying her face in the hollow of his neck. Her crying was not human. It was the silent howl of a soul that had been torn from hell. "I found you. I found you. I'm here, my love." "I'm here," Sebastian repeated, frantically kissing her dirty forehead, her tangled hair, pressing his face against hers, feeling his tears merge with hers. "Sebastian," Constance sobbed. Her voice was harsh, broken by years of screaming in the dark without being heard. "Sophie, my child, where is my child? She's safe, she's outside, she led me to you." "We have to go, Constance. We don't have time." The millionaire looked down at his wife's ankle. The rusty iron shackle had cut into her skin, leaving a deep, purulent mark around the bone. The heavy steel chain was embedded in a ring forged into the concrete floor itself. There was no lock to shoot. It was masonry designed to be eternal. Sebastian sprang to his feet, grabbed the submachine gun from the floor, and used it as a lever. He wedged the thick barrel between the concrete ring and the first link of the chain. He braced one foot against the wall, tensing the muscles in his arms and back until he felt the fibers might tear. The metal of the weapon groaned, threatening to bend. "Now," Constance whispered, coughing blood into her hand. Her body trembled as she witnessed her husband's effort. "Isabella took everything from me, Sebastian. Every night she came down, stood here, and told me how she kissed you, how she prepared her wedding dress. She forced me to look at photos of your wedding." The name was enough fuel. With a guttural roar that vibrated the caged bulb in the ceiling, Sebastian pushed down with a blind, lethal force, born of the most absolute hatred a man could harbor. Crack! The concrete ring, corroded by years of underground dampness and overcome by the leverage, burst. The chain came free, falling to the floor with a heavy clatter. Constance was free, but her body was broken. She tried to stand, but her legs instantly gave out. She would have crashed to the cement floor if Sebastian hadn't caught her inches from falling. He lifted her into his arms as if she were made of glass. Her weight was alarming. Isabella had been methodically starving her day by day, hoping she would die on her own so as not to stain her hands with blood. "Hold on to me. I'm never letting you go again," Sebastian said, cradling Constance's head against his torn chest. He picked up the submachine gun with one hand, resting it on his hip. He carried her out of the cell and across the threshold into the dark corridor. Constance closed her eyes, unable to bear the faint light of the dying fluorescence after so many years of perpetual darkness. But the victory of the rescue lasted exactly 3 heartbeats. Just as Sebastian set foot on the first concrete step to begin the ascent to the surface, a sound cut off both their breaths. It was the electric hum of the main elevators coming to life, the same elevators Sebastian had seen, closed and dead, in the sanatorium lobby minutes earlier. Power had been reactivated from outside. Sebastian looked up the stairwell. Through the clear space rising 3 floors, he saw the relentless flash of tactical flashlights, penetrating the darkness of the upper level, bouncing off the white-tiled walls. And then a voice traveled down, amplified by the echo of the stairwell. A clear, elegant, sweet, and absolutely poisonous woman's voice. "Did you think it would be that easy, Sebastian?" Isabella Fontaine's voice resonated, distilling a cruelty that froze his blood. "Go down. Block the exits. I want my best friend dead before she sees the light of day again." The elevator emitted a dry chime, indicating its descent to level -3. The tactical lights began to descend rapidly down the stairs. They were trapped in the concrete tomb 50 meters underground, and death, armed to the teeth, had just arrived to seal the vault forever. The nuptial ambush. The metallic clang of the elevator descending through the concrete shaft was the sound of a guillotine falling in slow motion. The digital number above the wrought iron steel doors at the end of the corridor changed with torturous slowness. Level -1, level -2. Sebastian knew that trying to go up the main stairs was suicide. The assassins were already sweeping the upper steps, cutting through the darkness like white blades. They were trapped in a shoebox 30 meters underground, with only one viable exit and an army blocking it. "Listen, my love," Sebastian whispered, pressing his forehead, covered in cold sweat and dust, against Constance's temple. The woman weighed so little in his arms that it broke his soul, but there was no time for mourning. "I'm going to turn off the lights. I'm going to make a lot of noise. You have to cover your ears and not let go of my neck. No matter what you hear, don't scream. Do you understand? Don't scream." Constance, trembling from the supernatural effort to remain conscious, nodded weakly. Her hands, reduced to skin and bone, clung to the bloody fabric of her husband's jacket with a strength born of the purest terror. The elevator indicator marked, level -3. Ding. Sebastian didn't wait for the doors to open completely. He raised the stolen submachine gun with his right arm, braced the stock against his hip to compensate for the recoil, and pulled the trigger. The deafening burst shattered the sepulchral silence of the basement. The hollow-point bullets swept across the main electrical panel, embedded in the concrete wall to the right of the elevator, the same one that powered the emergency lights of the corridor and the door mechanism. A shower of blue and orange sparks erupted in the air, followed by a dull explosion. Absolute darkness swallowed level. -3 inches a fraction of a second, just as the elevator doors got stuck halfway open. "Contact in front! Suppressive fire!" Roger's unmistakable voice roared from inside the elevator. The entire corridor suddenly lit up, not with lamps, but with the strobe-like muzzle flashes of 4 automatic rifles firing blindly in the darkness. The sound was a physical hammering, an acoustic pressure that burst eardrums. The bullets impacted the concrete walls, splintering the centuries-old tiles and raising clouds of asbestos dust and hot lead fragments that whistled through the air. Sebastian was no longer there. Taking advantage of the chaos and the temporary blindness of the muzzle flashes, he had slipped to the left, crossing the corridor flooded with dirty water towards the abandoned hydrotherapy area. It was an immense and cavernous hall, filled with ancient cast-iron bathtubs, coated in rusted porcelain and half-ruined dividing walls. He threw himself behind the largest bathtub in the deepest corner of the room, just as a stray bullet grazed his left deltoid. The millionaire stifled a cry of pain, clenching his teeth until he tasted blood in his mouth. The suit fabric was instantly soaked in dark, thick red. "Force that door open!" Roger shouted. "Activate tactical lights! Sweep every inch!" He couldn't have gone far with her in tow. The crunch of forced metal echoed down the corridor. The mercenaries pushed the stuck elevator doors open and began to flood the basement. 6 high-intensity light beams cut through the darkness like fog lights, casting monstrous shadows of rusted stretchers and overturned wheelchairs on the concrete walls. Sebastian breathed through his mouth, panting silently, trying to control the sharp pain in his shoulder. Constance hid her face in his chest, coughing weakly. Each spasm in his wife's body was a countdown to death. "Thorn." Isabella Fontaine's voice floated down the corridor, crawling along the damp floor like a poisonous snake. It was a calm, sickeningly sweet tone. contrasting with the smell of gunpowder and blood. "Where are you, my love? Our flight to the Maldives leaves in 3 hours. You wouldn't want us to miss our honeymoon over this little misunderstanding." Sebastian peered a millimeter of his face over the edge of the rusted bathtub. The image he caught made his stomach churn. Isabella walked down the center of the corridor, flanked by Roger and 2 heavily armed mercenaries. Her wedding dress, which hours earlier was worth a small country's budget, was now a nightmare vision. The white silk skirt was soaked with black sewage water, torn at the edges and stained with mud. The bodice was splattered with a drop of blood, probably from the guard Sebastian had massacred in the booth. But she walked with her back straight, chin held high, holding a silver semi-automatic pistol in her right hand with the naturalness of one holding a champagne glass. "Come out, Sebastian. Be a man for once in your life," Isabella provoked, stopping at the threshold of the hydrotherapy room. "Are you really going to die in a rotting basement next to that breathing corpse?" Roger made a tactical hand signal. 2 mercenaries separated from the main group and began to advance, flanking the room, checking behind each half-ruined wall, approaching Sebastian's position dangerously. The millionaire checked his weapons magazine. He had perhaps 15 bullets left. They were too many. They were cornered at a tactical disadvantage, outnumbered and outgunned. One of the mercenaries kicked a rusted metal surgical tray that resonated with a terrible clatter. The man pointed his flashlight towards the corner, where the cast-iron bathtub was located. The blinding white light hit Sebastian's face. "I've got them! Sector 3, behind the..." The mercenary couldn't finish the sentence. Sebastian sprang up like a coiled spring, driven by pure fury, ignoring the fire in his left shoulder. He raised the weapon and let loose a short, controlled burst of 3 bullets. The projectiles impacted directly in the man's chest and neck, throwing him backward into a puddle of stagnant water. But by revealing his position, Sebastian signed his own sentence. The other mercenary instantly opened fire, shattering the edge of the porcelain bathtub inches from Constance's head. Sebastian had to duck, covering his wife's body with his own, as a shower of iron and ceramic shrapnel fell on them. "Ceasefire! Ceasefire, you imbeciles!" Isabella shouted, raising her free hand. "I said I want to do it myself. I want to see her eyes, when she stops breathing." The ceasefire was immediate, leaving only the echo of the shots humming in Sebastian's ears. Suddenly, a deafening mechanical click shook the basement. Click, click, click. Roger had found the manual switchbox for the emergency diesel generators. The enormous industrial lamps, embedded in the concrete ceiling, protected by wire cages, flickered twice before turning on with a brutal electrical hum. The hydrotherapy room was illuminated with a sick, yellow, merciless light. There were no longer shadows to hide in, no more surprises. Sebastian looked up. Less than 5 meters away, in a perfect semicircle of death, stood Roger and the 3 remaining mercenaries, aiming their laser-sighted rifles directly at his head. And in the center, walking slowly with the sound of black water splashing under her white heels, was Isabella Fontaine. The ambush had closed. There was no physical escape possible. The ace up the sleeve. The silence in the enormous concrete room was thick, interrupted only by Constance's hoarse, whistling breath and the hum of the emergency generators. Isabella stopped 3 meters from the bathtub, where Sebastian held his wife's fragile body. The mud-stained bride tilted her head, observing the scene with a genuine grimace of disgust and sadistic fascination. "Look closely at her, Sebastian," Isabella said, her voice echoing off the tiled walls. "Look at what you've been mourning for 7 years. A specter, a bag of dirty bones that smells of urine and sickness. This is the great Constance Valois, the woman you rejected me for in university, the brilliant architect for whom you cast me aside, leaving me the role of the spinster friend." Constance shuddered, clenching her skeletal fists against Sebastian's torn shirt. Her green eyes, sunken in their sockets, searched the face of the woman she once considered her sister. "You were my family," Constance whispered, with a voice so fragile it seemed about to break like glass. Saliva mixed with a trickle of blood at the corner of her lips. "I gave you the key to my house. I entrusted you with my pregnancy." Isabella let out a dry laugh, devoid of any human warmth. "And that's why it was so easy, darling, because you were stupid," Isabella replied, distractedly pointing the pistol at the ceiling. "The day of the accident, when I gave you the sedative injection in your arm while we had tea, you didn't even flinch. You trusted me until you woke up chained to that wall. The charred body at the bottom of the ravine was a work of art from the morgue my family controls. Roger got the fake dental records. I made sure to cry louder than anyone at the funeral." Isabella stepped forward, her dark eyes fixed on Sebastian, who stared back with cold, silent hatred. "It was a perfect job, and the reward was even better," Isabella continued, savoring each syllable. "For 7 years I slept in your bed, Sebastian. 7 years managing 50% of your shares, building an empire, comforting you as you fell apart on the anniversary of her death. I was your lifeline, your goddess. We had everything, the world at our feet. And today, at our altar, you had to ruin everything because of a muddy brat who couldn't keep quiet." Sebastian did not raise his weapon. He intentionally let it drop into the dirty water at his feet. The sound of metal clashing against the tile made the mercenaries tense their fingers on the trigger, but no one fired. The millionaire knew that in a speed duel against 4 rifles, he was dead. He needed to use the only weapon the Fontaines would never understand: the brain of a corporate and technological predator. He slowly leaned Constance's body against the cold iron of the bathtub and stood up, straightening to his full height despite the bleeding pain in his shoulder. The ruined jacket, the stained shirt, the blood on his face, all disappeared before the aura of pure, dark, unbreakable power that the man emanated. "You talk too much when you think you've won, Isabella," Sebastian said. His voice was not a shout, it was flat, deep, devoid of fear. It was the voice of the man who had destroyed monopolies and crushed his enemies in the boardrooms of Bay Street. "It's your greatest flaw. You always need an audience to applaud your genius." Isabella frowned, tightening her grip on her pistol. "There's no audience, Sebastian. It's just us. And in 5 minutes, you and your beloved wife will be ashes in this sanatorium's medical incinerator. Roger, kill him first. I want her to see him fall." Roger Dubois raised his rifle, aiming directly at the center of Sebastian's forehead. But the millionaire did not flinch. On the contrary, a smile, a grim and wolfish sneer, appeared on Sebastian Thorne's split lips. Slowly, using only the index finger and thumb of his uninjured right hand, he reached into the inner pocket of what remained of his bespoke trousers. He pulled out a rectangular object of dark glass and titanium, his personal mobile phone. The screen was cracked but lit. "Did you forget what I do, Isabella?" Sebastian asked, raising the phone to his chest height. A small red light and a green microphone icon blinked incessantly in the upper corner of the broken screen. "I am the CEO of Thorne Communications. I own 80% of the fiber optics in the north of the country, the low-orbit satellites, and the government encryption network. Did you really think the man who built this damn country's communications network would enter his wife's tomb without life insurance?" Roger lowered his weapon's barrel infinitesimally, panic piercing his hard military training. "What did you do?" Isabella demanded, confidence draining from her face, replaced by a sudden, cold, stinging fear. "The signal jammer is active. You can't make calls down here. The walls are lead-lined. You're right. A commercial phone wouldn't have a signal in this bunker. But this isn't a commercial phone." Sebastian turned the screen towards them. On the fragmented display, the words, "Direct Satellite Transmission Active," glowed red, along with a timer that read 12 minutes and 40 seconds. 12 minutes ago, while you and your hunting dogs descended in the elevator, believing yourselves masters of hell, I activated the corporate override emergency protocol. It uses a military frequency band embedded in the hardware, immune to your black market jammer toys. Isabella took a step back, all color draining from her face. Her lips trembled. "It's a bluff. You're lying to buy time," she stammered, pointing the silver pistol at him, but this time her lace-wrapped hand trembled uncontrollably. "A bluff?" Sebastian let out a dark laugh, a sound that echoed off the tiles and chilled the mercenary's blood. "Isabella, you've just confessed in high-definition acoustic to Constance's kidnapping, the faked murder, the charred body trafficked from the morgue by Roger, the corporate fraud conspiracy to steal my shares. Absolutely every word, every detail of your damn villain monologue has been transmitted live in real time through an open channel." Sebastian took a step forward, shortening the distance to the weapons pointed at him, defying death itself. His gaze was liquid fire. "And you know who I transmitted it to?" Sebastian whispered, his voice cutting the static air of the basement. "Not to the local police you've bought, not to your judges. I sent it directly to my board of directors, to the Minister of National Defense, to Interpol's central office in Ottawa, and, as the cherry on top, to the servers of the 5 largest news networks in the country simultaneously. You can't stop it, you can't delete it, and you can't buy off 500,000 people who just heard your confession." The silence that followed those words was absolute. The sound of Isabella Fontaine's empire crumbling into dust. Roger Dubois slowly lowered his rifle. The ex-military man knew exactly how Thorne's military technology worked. He looked at Isabella and then at the ground. He knew they were dead. Not physically, but legally, financially, absolutely destroyed. If he pulled the trigger now, it wouldn't be a covert homicide. It would be a nationally televised assassination, and he would spend the rest of his life in a maximum security cell or in front of a firing squad. "Roger, kill him right now, I order you," Isabella screamed, losing her mind completely, panic distorting her beautiful features into a hysterical monster. She waved the silver pistol wildly in Sebastian's direction, but Roger didn't move. Instead, he took a step back, separating himself from her. The mercenaries exchanged looks of pure terror under their balaclavas, and instinctively lowered the muzzles of their submachine guns. No one was going to sink into the abyss for a lost war. The ace up the sleeve had been played. Sebastian Thorne didn't need to fire a single bullet to annihilate his enemies. And just at that instant, as if to confirm the sentence dictated by the millionaire, a distant, sharp, multiplying sound began to filter through the reinforced concrete of the ceiling from the world above. It was sirens, not one or two. There were dozens of sirens, of military convoys, federal patrols, and news helicopters, converging on the sanatorium grounds on the national highway. The entire world had just heard the hell, and the entire world was coming to break down the doors. Sebastian slowly put his phone back in his pocket. He looked at Isabella, whose armed arm trembled aimlessly, her breath ragged and her eyes wide with the madness of imminent defeat. "It's over, Isabella," Sebastian declared, with the coldness of a judge executing a sentence. The fire lied, but the satellite transmission didn't. "Welcome to your own glass prison." The final veil. The howl of the sirens ceased to be a distant echo and became an acoustic drill that vibrated the foundations of level -3. The noise of heavy engines, the screech of tires slamming on the gravel outside, and the unmistakable beating of helicopter blades cutting the night wind filtered through the abandoned sanatorium's ventilation ducts. The red and blue strobe lights of dozens of federal patrols and military vehicles began to cast ghostly flashes through the ceiling grates, staining the dirty water of the hydrotherapy room with the colors of absolute condemnation. Isabella Fontaine, the Ice Queen, the architect of the most atrocious lie in Toronto's high society, was crumbling in real time. The mask of sociopathic control she had maintained for 7 years fractured into 1,000 pieces under the relentless yellow light of the emergency generators. Her breathing was an erratic wheeze, an animal gasp. The perfect makeup that should have adorned her face on the covers of Toronto society magazines had run with sweat, humidity, and tears of pure fury, scarring her emaciated face like black marks. She looked at the cracked screen in Sebastian's hand, where the red satellite transmission counter continued to run, relentless, unstoppable, testifying to her madness before the entire world. The Fontaine Empire, forged over decades, had just been reduced to radioactive ashes in less than 15 minutes. Her shares were worthless. Her name was synonymous with monster. "It's a lie." Isabella screamed with a high-pitched, torn voice that echoed hysterically against the broken tiles. "It's a corporate trick. You're bluffing, Sebastian. The jammer works. Nothing got out of here." But Isabella knew the truth. The terror in her own mercenaries' eyes confirmed it. The battalion landing above their heads confirmed it. She was finished. A spastic tremor ran through the bride's right arm. Her knuckles turned white as she squeezed the grip of the silver semi-automatic pistol. If she was going to sink into the abyss, she wouldn't do it alone. If the throne was lost, the king and queen would burn with her. "If my empire falls, you won't enjoy the ashes," Isabella roared, twisting her torso with desperate violence. She didn't aim at Sebastian, the man who had just destroyed her. She aimed directly at the fragile, malnourished chest of Constance, who was still clinging to her husband's torn jacket at the edge of the iron bathtub. Isabella's finger, with its white porcelain nail, contracted on the trigger, but the shot never occurred. A brutal, swift, and crushing impact struck Isabella's wrist before the firing pin fell. It wasn't Sebastian, it was Roger Dubois. The ex-military man, calculating his own survival with the coldness of a cornered fox, had made his decision. He was not going to die for a deranged woman, nor was he going to add first-degree murder in front of a national audience. With a precise tactical movement, Roger struck Isabella's armed arm with the heavy barrel of his assault rifle. The bride's wrist bone cracked with a dry sound, and Isabella let out a shriek of pure agony, dropping the silver pistol which fell into the stagnant water with a dull splash. Before she could react, Roger kicked her behind the knee, forcing her to fall face down onto the broken tiles, completely ruining what remained of her French silk dress. "Game over, boss," Roger growled, stepping with his heavy military boot on Isabella's back to hold her against the cold ground. He looked up at Sebastian, lowering the barrel of his rifle as a sign of unconditional surrender. "You win, boss. I'll testify. I'll give the Attorney General all the offshore accounts, the morgue locations, the bribes, to the judges, everything in exchange for partial immunity. I didn't kidnap her, I only covered up. You know I'm pragmatic." Sebastian did not respond to his ex-head of security's negotiation. He didn't care about Roger's immunity or the offshore accounts. His only universe at that instant was the woman trembling in his arms. At that precise second, the stuck elevator doors were blown to pieces by a controlled breach charge. The explosion shook the entire basement, filling the corridor with gray smoke and the smell of burnt gunpowder. "Federal police, weapons down, hands on your heads. Now, now, now!" A voice roared through a megaphone, followed by the deafening tramp of 50 tactical boots flooding level -3. Dozens of red light beams from assault rifles swept the hydrotherapy room, aiming at Roger, the frozen mercenaries, and the fallen figure of Isabella Fontaine. Sebastian used his body as a shield over Constance, raising his right hand, the one holding the phone, as a signal to halt. "I am Sebastian Thorne," the millionaire bellowed, his voice broken, asserting himself over the chaos of the operation. "The shooters are surrendered. Lower your weapons and bring paramedics. My wife is dying. I need oxygen right now." The tactical squad leader recognized the magnate instantly. The operation shifted from assault to rescue in a blink, as federal agents violently subdued Roger and handcuffed a screaming Isabella Fontaine, who shrieked hysterical incoherencies about weddings and betrayals, dragging her through the mud of her own dungeon. A team of military paramedics burst into the room with rigid stretchers and oxygen tanks. "No, don't touch me. Sebastian, don't let them take me." Constance sobbed, gripped by panic at seeing strangers approach her. Her mind, traumatized by years of confinement, could not process freedom. Her skeletal hands dug into the flesh of her husband's chest. "I'm not letting you go. No one is taking you anywhere without me. I'll carry you. I'll get you out of here," Sebastian swore to her, ignoring the pain of the bullet that had grazed his shoulder, ignoring the blood soaking his shirt and the physical exhaustion that threatened to make him faint. Sebastian gently pushed the paramedics away and lifted Constance into his arms. She hid her face in his neck, closing her eyes tightly. The ascent from hell was a surreal parade. Sebastian walked, flanked by heavily armed soldiers, up the concrete ramp towards the surface. With each step, the air became lighter, losing the stench of dampness and asbestos. When they finally crossed the tempered glass doors of the sanatorium and stepped outside, the magnitude of the operation hit them. The national highway was cut off. There were at least 50 emergency vehicles, fire trucks, ambulances, and black government vans. Above, 3 helicopters with spotlights illuminated the surrounding forest as if it were daylight. Behind the police cordon, a legion of journalists, television cameras, and mobile units broadcast the climax of the news that had paralyzed the entire country. The fall of the Fontaines, the resurrection of Constance Valois. The cameras desperately pointed towards the main entrance when the imposing but shattered figure of the magnate emerged from the trees carrying his wife. Camera flashes exploded like a storm of white lightning in the Toronto night. Reporters shouted his name, demanding a statement, seeking the scoop of the decade. Sebastian did not look at any camera. His face, stained with blood and mud, was a mask of absolute concentration. He did not stop at the intensive care ambulance with its doors open waiting for them. He walked past it, ignoring the police commander's orders. He walked directly towards the edge of the forest, towards the darkness where the lights didn't reach. There, hidden behind an earthen mound, was the old, rusty Ford pickup truck. Sebastian reached the passenger door. His heart pounded wildly. Very carefully, he set Constance down on her own feet, holding her firmly by the waist so she wouldn't collapse, and with his free hand, he opened the rusted metal door, which screeched in the night. The cabin's interior was dark. "Sophie," Sebastian called. His voice, which had roared death threats minutes before, was now a warm, trembling whisper, full of devotion. "You can open your eyes now, little one. The monsters are gone." From under the broken vinyl seat, covered in dust, dry mud and tears, a small head of dark curls peeked out. The girl's immense green eyes shone, reflecting the distant lights of the patrol cars. She saw Sebastian first, and then her gaze dropped to the fragile figure he held. Constance let out a muffled cry, a sound that tore the soul of everyone present. It was a cry that contained 7 years of agony, of prayers in the dark, of paralyzing fear. "Mom!" Sophie cried. The girl leaped out of the truck like a spring, ignoring the stones that cut her bare feet. She threw herself against Constance's legs. The mother dropped to her knees on the gravel, uncaring of the physical pain, and enveloped her daughter in her skeletal arms. The two merged in a desperate embrace, crushing the girl's mud against the mother's gray rags. They cried, shouted each other's names, kissed each other's faces, touching as if they needed to confirm that the other was real and not a ghost born of the madness of confinement. Sebastian fell to his knees beside them. His enormous arms encircled the two women of his life, creating a physical barrier against the outside world, against the lights, against the cameras, and against the past. He buried his face in Constance's hair, brushing his daughter's forehead, and for the first time since the nightmare had begun 7 years ago, the ruthless millionaire allowed himself to weep with absolute, heartbreaking vulnerability. They were 3 survivors, emerging from the ashes. The silver ring, deformed by the false fire, hung from the girl's neck, shining faintly under the moonlight, marking the end of the lie and the beginning of life. Epilogue. 1 year later. The spring sun beat strongly against the immense windows of the Thorne Mansion, located in the exclusive hills of West Vancouver. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and gardenias, an absolute and intentional contrast to the confinement of the past. Sebastian stood on the marble terrace, dressed in a white linen shirt and casual trousers, holding a steaming cup of coffee. His face had lost the stony tension that characterized him for almost a decade. The scars on his hands were the only physical reminder of the night that changed everything. He looked out at the property's immense gardens. There, running after a golden retriever puppy, was Sophie. She wore a bright yellow dress, clean shoes, and her dark hair fell in a cascade of loose curls that caught the sunlight. Her loud, contagious laugh filled the valley. There was no trace left of the terrified, mud-covered girl. She was a happy, radiant child who had just learned to read and dominated the entire house with her stubborn personality. Sitting on a picnic blanket under the shade of a century-old oak tree was Constance. The year of physical therapy, medical interventions, specialized nutrition, and intensive psychological support had worked a slow but sure miracle. Although still thin, she had regained the glow in her skin. Her dark hair had grown back healthy, framing that face Sebastian never stopped loving. She wore a light dress and was sketching in a notebook, slowly resuming her old passion for architecture. Constance looked up from the paper, and her green eyes met Sebastian's on the terrace. She smiled at him. It was a calm, honest smile, free of shadows. She raised her hand, showing him a new platinum ring that sparkled on her ring finger. Right next to the old rusty chain, she refused to take off her neck as a symbol of survival. Miles away, in the federal maximum security prison for women, Isabella Fontaine faced her second week of life imprisonment without parole, stripped of her name, her fortune, and her sanity, locked in a 3x3-meter cell, condemned to live in the same hell of cold walls she had designed for her best friend. The world had forgotten her. Sebastian left the coffee cup on the terrace table, descended the stone steps 2 by 2, and ran to the garden, to his wife and daughter, knowing with absolute certainty that no corporate merger, no $1 billion in the bank, and no empire of glass was worth a single second of the sun that now caressed his family's faces.